Here is a brief description of famous economist theories, from Milton Friedman to Karl Marx. This is a rebroadcast of an episode from November 2020.
You're listening to the podcast Coffee with Mike and Julie, Libertarians Talk Psychology. This is current commentary from an MBA businessman and a PhD psychologist.
Look what they done to my song, Ma.
Who are the great economic thinkers of the past that are still influencing us today? With this episode, we present 7 economic theorists from the 1600s until today. So, you encouraged me to be a little bit more organized about the economists that are my
heroes.
That I like my heroes, right? Because they've just been kind of a jumble in my head.
Economic philosophers.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So here are the ones that I had, and I only removed one of them because he didn't have what I thought was a foundational concept. But John Locke, Adam Smith, then I also wrote down Karl Marx and John Maynard Keynes. But then I went back with Milton Friedman, Murray Rothbard, and F.A. Hayek. So John Locke was born in 1632. He was one of the first people to come up with the idea of natural rights, that we humans are not born to be subjects of the king. We are born with our own natural individual rights. And that was kind of a new concept back then. And he also...
What year was that?
Well, he was born in 1632. He died in 1704.
So it was a new concept.
So I'm going to say late 1600s is when he was popular.
So it was in the late 1600s that people were basically born free.
He came up with the concept, and he said it was up to the individual to consent to give up their natural freedom for political order. So when you allow yourself to be a subject of the king, it's through your consent that you are a subject to the king, because you were born with a natural right.
Well, that's a nice twist on power.
Right.
But yeah, so that worked, because
And he also was one of the first ones to come up with the concept of the non-aggression principle, which is, it is wrong to exert for one human to exert force on another human. Mm-hmm. Only activities between consenting adults are considered legitimate activities.
Yeah, so he called that non-aggression, which...
Well, he didn't call it the non-aggression principle, but his description of it would fit what today we call the non-aggression principle.
You don't steal or take or force another individual.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, there is a psychological theory on aggression that has to do exactly with that aggression is where you reach into someone else's territory and take something that they're not willing to give you. So that's called aggression.
So those were the 2 or 3 key concepts that he came up with in the late 1600s. Then Adam Smith comes along in the late 1700s, and he comes up with really he popularizes the whole idea of free trade. That free trade is that if you have individuals who can freely trade with each other, that both parties win. He came up with the idea of a win-win. Up until then, it was always kind of considered one person can kind of win and one person loses in any kind of trade.
Oh, really?
But he kind of emphasized that one person specializes in what he's good at and the other person specializes in what he's good at, and the two of them are better off because of it. They trade, and they're better off because
he
of
noticed that there was a benefit to cooperativeness.
That's right. And
now, what year is that?
Late 1700. And he, of course, you know the famous title, Wealth of Nations, but he said the wealth of a nation is the goods that are available to the citizens and not the stockpile of gold and silver. In other words, he pointed out that it's not money that defines wealth. What defines wealth is
what it will buy.
Exactly. It's the
that seems obvious.
The production that the citizens profit from. That is what defines.
So this
the wealth of a nation.
that's a cool thing, because that's like what the wealth is the innovation and creativity and productivity. It's not the stockpile of tokens you have locked away somewhere.
And of course, we're going to come back to that concept when we get to John Maynard Keynes, because Keynes kind of took the opposite belief.
Well, I was wondering why you had Karl Marx on the list, too.
Well, Karl Marx was late 1800s and Keynes was early 1900s. So Marx, of course, is not someone I admire as a libertarian. But
I guess
but
not. I hope not.
But he is considered the most influential economic philosopher of all time. But
really?
Yeah, because he had such influence. And of course, I would say
he's peddling the utopia.
He peddles what a certain portion of our population want to hear.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Keynes. Both of those guys peddle an idea that people really want to be true.
Yeah, motivated reasoning.
But when you look at what they're peddling, it has some serious flaws in it, but these people don't care.
Yeah.
But Karl Marx, he says there was a class consciousness, that capitalism reduces or produces internal tensions and will eventually fail, because he says capitalism promotes a class of people that are rich and the class that are the workers. And that was his basic concept, is that capitalism is going to fail because it promotes this class division that is going to cause tension and eventually fail. But of course, he wasn't happy that it was just going to cause tension and fail on its own. He promoted that we need to go out there and violently...
That he and his followers need to go out there
and... to conquer these people.
Little motivated reasoning going on there. I am going to change this sad state of affairs.
And of course, his theories had a complete absence of price signals, because the price of things helps determine what products should be, increase the production of which products and decrease the production of other products.
Yeah, it's an information flow. Price is information flow, and it's a feedback loop.
That's right. And his theories had a lack of incentives, because you have some centralized authority who's telling you which product to make.
Yeah, I'll tell you the other thing, just to add here too. I hate being in situations where my efforts benefit someone else so that they benefit more than me from my efforts. I mean, I have triggers that go off with that, and I think almost everybody does, except really agreeable people, agreeable doormatish type people. The whole idea, I hated that in graduate school where we all got together and we all worked and we all got the same grade. The team got a grade. I always wound up doing the work. Me and some other person always wound up doing all the work.
These teams that...
Oh, man, that taught you... I don't know what that taught you, but taught you to be bitter and miserable in these teams.
Because there was always one. There was always someone who's freeloading.
There was always about half the group, but there was certainly one freeloading, and they call it in psychology now, they call it free riding, but freeloading is how the term we use. It's like... You ride along, and it's a horrible situation for the people pulling the wagon.
Yeah.
It's to have all these loafers. So, in other words, anyone with any life experience knows that philosophy is miserable for the people that actually like working and are kind of workaholics, like I am. I'm kind of a workaholic. And I hate it. It's like the minute I could get out of that situation and just work for myself, the more I liked it.
Well, yeah.
So, but I don't want to interrupt your flow. This fascinating stuff.
It's okay. I'm glad you like it.
I
was kind of enthusiastic.
What dawns on me, just to add another little thing, what dawned on me, it took them this long to figure this out, where any child knows this. Any fourth grader knows these feelings about.
Yeah, but you know how this works. What they're not saying about Karl Marx is 100 years later, we now have plenty of experience with socialism and communism.
What is
we know it is a dramatic, brutal failure every time.
Brutal failure. Jordan Peterson's one execution away from utopia.
That's right.
I don't know if he was quoting someone else or he called that up, but boy, and you read Solzhenitsyn, and you will see, oh my God, this stuff putrefies.
But at the time, in the late 1800s, when Karl Marx is first coming out with these ideas, you can almost forgive people because he's telling them something. Man, I really hope that's true. I want to be the one deciding who gets what, and I think that would be so much better. That sounded like a good idea to them. But 100 years later, we know that is a complete.
Well, we
failure.
not only know.
People fall for it over and over again.
Well, yeah, there's some game and trick to it, isn't there?
Right.
And so we know it now. We know just from the experience, from the human laboratory, the human experience, the field, that it doesn't work. But we also have the theories that the social systems and organizational theories that predict over and over that's not going to work.
Yeah,
that's not going to work long term.
Well, there were people who were analyzing Marx's early conversations, and they were saying, "Look, this makes no sense."
Just to interrupt one more time, I'm trying to think. The timeline is very interesting to me because of the psychological theorists that were coming out, but the Skinnerian, the behavior modification, and that's a different level of intervening into behavior, but it's how the brain is wired, and it's just so clear that we're wired for reinforcement.
Yeah,
we're just wired. Anything you reinforce, you get more of in a human being.
Well, I'm going to give myself a little chart with these guys on a timeline, and it occurs to me I might do a little timeline chart of
Darwin, Watson, the emergence the emergence of behavior. They call it different things now, but it's learning and behavior theory. Uh-huh. The emergence of that.
That'll be neat.
And this reminds me, as Isaac was, and we're talking about 1960s now. We come a long way from where you're at, and I don't want to take any more time. But so you get Darwin and Freud, looking at that. So you get both the individual social level, but you get the instinctual level, the non-conscious level, appearing in the theoretical literature and the philosophy and the theories.
Yeah.
That begins to wait, behavior isn't everything. The reinforcement of behavior, it's a lot, and you cannot ignore it. But there's also another level impacting human behavior. And then we say, just on another side, now we see there's another level, consciousness, impacting human behavior. So anyway, keep going. This is fascinating.
Isn't it? So then, over 100 years later, was John Maynard Keynes. So you had Karl Marx in the late 1800s. Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't that much. But anyway, the early 1900s was John Maynard Keynes. Karl Marx was late 1800s. So Keynes is another guy that...
Now, where does he stem from? Germany?
No, Keynes was from, I'm pretty sure he was England.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Karl Marx was Germany. But and I ought to go ahead and say where these people are from.
Yeah, because their social climates. I mean, it's
kind of relevant to your topic as to where they came from.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a good chart. We need to make a chart on this. This will be cool. Yeah.
But Keynes is another one who is not a fan of libertarians, but he is another one that told people what they wanted to hear. And this one's really good. Now, keep in mind, he's the early 1900s. So we're dealing in the real world, we're dealing with World War I and II, and we're dealing with people being frustrated with recessions.
Yeah.
So he promotes the idea that, hey, we can avoid these recessions by just spending more money. In other words, we can borrow against the future, and we will stimulate.
Kind of like today is going on. We can buy our way out of the coronavirus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of freaky, isn't it? Okay.
It's very scary.
It's very scary.
But the idea that, hey, we just borrow money against the future and spend money, and that's going to stimulate the economy. And again, politicians love that idea. And keep in mind, in the early 1900s, this is when the politicians first started seizing control of the money supply. Up until then, that
was in the early 1900s when
right, up until
like income tax.
Well, I'm thinking more the gold standard.
Oh.
Once they said our money does not need to be backed up by gold, then they could say that
Katie bolt the door.
Yeah, they could say they could print as much money as they wanted to.
Yeah,
and of course, it just ends up being either inflation or future debt. And these politicians can do that. They loved the idea of what Keynes was preaching.
Yeah, that's another motivated reasoning. They love it because it's not coming back on them.
And you'll note that it's different from what Adam Smith said. Because Adam Smith was talking about it's the goods and the services that define the wealth of your country. And Keynes has taken a different tack. He's saying, hey, it's the money. We're gonna stimulate
more
with money, and that's gonna make everyone better.
Yeah, that's kind of bizarre.
So he was about total spending, giving promoting economic activity. And again,
that is totally naive thinking, don't you think? I mean,
it is, but no, they still have plenty of people that believe in Keynes. Plenty of our politicians go for Keynes.
We need to dig into that and find the psychology behind that.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So that was early 1900s. Then in the mid 1900s.
Now the idea, let me just stop you there. The idea from Keynesian is you can spend, government is in a catbird seat and can spend money, and that has these good effects in society, and all this good comes from that. Is that basically the idea?
That's the idea.
And that it
just
doesn't
ignore the fact, or
that the money doesn't come from anything. That
they
it's
ignore
not.
That there may be a consequence. They just ignore that there might be a consequence. They continually optimistic that the Federal Reserve or whoever can fix whatever problem they might be causing by spending all this money.
Honestly, the unintended consequences of intervening into a system, that's like legend, that's everywhere. I said that, but the reason that's everywhere is because human beings think in snapshots instead of systems.
Yeah.
And systems are always a whole lot more complicated than you'll ever know because there's so many invisible feedback loops that are self-reinforcing and self-regulating and self-balancing. So that in itself isn't the worst thing, though. The thing I'm aware of as you're talking about this is the idea of where this money is going to come from just kind of materializes from some place. So there's no real exchange going on. Okay, so this is usually the part of economics that gets me, which is the idea that somebody just prints money and can the money supply, the token economy, the tokens. Who prints the poker chips that we exchange? And so this is another topic, because this always stumps me without, I guess I'm concrete thinking about it. Like, if it's like,
well, related to that, what's happened in more modern history is that our government has learned to stimulate certain portions of the economy, like the housing industry.
Yeah.
Or
they meddle with everything.
And of course, everything they meddle with creates a bubble. Sooner or later, the bubble bursts.
There's an unintended consequence.
And every time they have the unintended consequence, they never admit that they created this damn problem.
No, of course not.
But they do say, we need to bail these banks out. They're too big to fail. Or this whatever industry it is too big to fail, or we can't have our poor hourly workers suffer, so let's give money to the banks. Well, what the hell? What logic is that? Why are we giving money to the banks?
Well, face it, that I don't understand, and I've tried to understand a little bit of this thing about, this is a whole discussion we need to have, and you need to talk about the banks, the money supply, the debt. When you watch the discussions about the debt, I mean, it freaks me out when I start listening to this stuff.
I wish I could say I am eager to talk about that because I know the answers, but I don't know. I don't completely understand what's going to happen in the future when our government does these activities.
Well, I think
the only thing that makes me feel better is that apparently nobody knows.
It looks like there's several positions about it, but nobody. And this gets to the point where all the evidence suggests that almost no one human beings cannot predict the future.
Yeah.
We're very, very bad about predicting things in complex systems. We human beings just do not have the best view.
So anyway,
predict.
That's John Maynard Keynes. So those are the two bad guys, Karl Marx and John Maynard Keynes.
The religious views.
They're telling people what they want to hear. And part of the reason, in my opinion, the reason those two guys were so popular is because they both told people what they wanted to hear.
Yeah, which I think they told them the social game. This like, things are free. They told them what they want to hear, which is things are free. Everyone loves everybody else.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as aggression. There is no such thing as cheaters or competition. Life is a bowl of cherries.
Yeah, our system totally gets rid of all the bourgeoisie. Our system, don't worry, you don't need to worry about those greedy rich people anymore once our system is in place.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was early 1900s. In the mid 1900s was a guy named Murray Rothbard, and he was the guy he was a very productive guy, and he was the libertarian, the classic libertarian. We come back again to the non-aggression principle that John Locke first talked about, but modern libertarians that is probably the key concept of modern libertarians, is because they apply it to government. They think government should be minimized so that you have the minimum force on individual freedom.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly we agree with that. I'd like for government to be non-aggressive,
right.
But it's a hugely aggressive thing.
Right.
You give people power and they become aggressive. There's just no way around that.
He promoted something called Anarcho-Capitalism, which is really I don't think we've ever seen it historically, but he promoted the idea that for the most part, for almost all government activities, you don't really have to have government. He promoted the idea that individuals consenting or groups of individuals consenting can come up with solutions that do not require government. So that remains to be seen as far as I'm concerned. But it is a great concept that I love to. The way I see it is, hey, let's experiment with minimizing government based on individual freedom. But anyway, that's Murray Rothbard. So then...
And that was mid-1900s.
That's mid-1900s. Then in the late 1900s are two guys, Milton Friedman and F.A. Hayek.
I thought Hayek is earlier than that.
I did too, but he was mid-1900s. He and Friedman knew each other, kind of debated each other. Yeah, but they were pretty similar. Milton Friedman and Hayek were pretty similar. Hayek was very much a libertarian, and Milton Friedman was kind of a different flavor. Of course, I'm a big fan of Milton Friedman and there's a reason for that. Oh, and one person I'm going to mention too is Ron Paul, because Ron Paul was around. He's also the late 1900s and the early 2000s is Ron Paul. But even though Ron Paul was not an economist, he, like Milton Friedman, had practical suggestions for how to incorporate or he had a plan. He had a specific plan. The only other person like that, as far as I'm concerned, was Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman had certain issues, and he was for certain issues, and he had a plan, a governmental plan, or a governmental solution or change that he would suggest, and so did Ron Paul. Hayek was more theoretical. Hayek got his Nobel Prize because he really made a good case that prices communicate information, which goes back to the idea of Marx. But he said prices are very important because they communicate information. And
he got a Nobel Prize for that simple idea.
I know.
Good for him.
And he was
in economics.
In economics.
This is always aggravating to me, how people in economics stumble on some very, very basic psychological concept and they get the Nobel Prize for it.
And the psychologist is totally
like price communicates information flow in a social system. I was like, yes. It's like, oh, we're going to give you the Nobel Prize for figuring that out.
So he was pretty theoretical. He was definitely a libertarian. Hayek believed that government should not be in the business of controlling the money supply.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, well, that is very controversial. There are only libertarians think that we should not have a Federal Reserve.
Hear, hear. I mean, I don't. We need to study that whole concept because I don't know enough about it.
There are plenty of libertarians who talk about that.
Yeah.
But Milton Friedman, they called him a monetarist. Monetarism. I'm not really sure what that means, but a key word: rational expectations. Milton Friedman was more on the quantitative side of economics. Hayek was more on the theoretical side of economics. But Milton Friedman believed in getting the money supply, measuring the money supply, and trying to come up with solutions and activities that responded to the measures of money supply. Hayek said you can't really measure money supply. You're kidding yourself to think that the government's measures of money supply can take into consideration all the things that really amount to money. So that was their only area.
And so Hayek said he counted not only the money supply, but the bartering of things.
That's right. And he said, you're kidding yourself to think that you can take what the government is trying to measure, or what anyone is trying to measure, and come up with any policy that's going to work, because there's no way to do that. So Hayek came up and said, we shouldn't even be in the business of trying to control the money supply. Milton Friedman had a little different view of that. But Milton Friedman was for deregulation. He was for privatization of things. He was for lowering taxes. And he was for eliminating conscription. And by the way, so was Hayek. So really, Hayek made the observation one time. Someone asked him, what is the difference between you and Milton Friedman? He said, we agree on almost all things except money.
Not bad. Not bad way to say it.
Each of them got their Nobel Prize on their work on money. But
it is economics.
It is economics. Well, but each of them was very liberal when it came to social stuff.
Which was true for libertarians.
Which is true for libertarians.
Comes from social stuff. It's like, hey, it's your business, not mine. But
and of course, there's Ron Paul, and I'm not going to try to talk about him yet, but I intend to supplement this thing with the actual suggestions for government, specific changes to government that Ron Paul and Milton Friedman pursued. Those two guys had specific changes they thought would be good things to pursue. And it's really the only practical way. I mean, I love the libertarian philosophical discussions. I do love all that. But when it comes to the practicality of the application in the real world, I really think Milton Friedman and Ron Paul are on the right track.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, there's theory, and hopefully your theory predicts, and then your interventions into a system have to take into account that it's going to be trial and error, because we can't see all the system. We're human beings. We're in the system. We can't see it. So one thing that I heard and that piques my interest is the nature of wealth, and how two of the theorists, or the two groups of theorists, one considered it kind of the money in the bank, and the other considered it almost the process of innovation. And so to add to that, the theory in psychology, which is not a very strong theory, is social exchange. There are other psychological sources of value, like beauty, leadership ability, that are traded, reproductive fertility, traded. You know, there are psychological sources of wealth that are almost invisible. So the economic picture has to involve those too. Then there's information, the creation of new ideas that's almost invisible. I mean, these add into these different ones. But the idea of what creates value and bartering ability, who can barter with what. So, okay, I just wanted to add that idea.
And I'd say that supports Hayek's argument about
there's more to it than
measuring money. Measuring money doesn't come close to measuring.
I think we're in a different age where, you know, why we're kind of concerned, like, why don't we have any inflation? It's because the value of things, there's some invisible value going on now in life. Okay, just wanted to add that and let you conclude.
Well, the thing I wanted to conclude with was the Milton Friedman statement about how to achieve good change. What he said was, you have to come up with a detailed plan for a specific program. And you promote that program, and it might be years that politicians will ridicule you and tell you you're crazy to think that we would ever do such a thing. But Milton Friedman said you have to be confident that sooner or later the status quo will fail. And when it does fail, those same politicians will be looking for an immediate solution to the problem. They're not purists. They're not principled people. They are looking for the status quo working, and when it doesn't work, they're looking for an immediate new solution to the problem. And he said, so you have to be always promoting your specific solution so that when the economy fails or when there's some sort of social upheaval, that their government...
When there's a sense of urgency. I mean,
there's a sense of urgency.
You always have to have a sense of urgency to get people off the couch.
That's right, because it never happens that they say, okay, what we have doesn't work, so let's spend a year studying the right solution to this problem. No, that's not how
the resistance to change is enormous.
That's right. So he said you have to have it in place, complete, so that
they can just pick it like a
ready solution.
And it's all...
And I think he was very effective. Milton Friedman's ideas, a lot of his ideas were incorporated for that very reason, and it was a good thing. Okay.
The libertarian idea aren't well understood in this country, so we've got a lot of room to grow, awaken, because we pedal backwards more than we pedal forward, I think. I mean, I think maybe there's room for optimism, but from our senior position and becoming clear to us, because we think in these terms, it's like a little bit of like, it's time to embrace, to rediscover these principles, because now's a very, very, very good time to do it, because we've got a fork in the road. Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff.
In conclusion, admittedly, this episode is heavily weighted toward the idea that economic success is maximized for all groups under free market individual choice. However, we grudgingly accept that a significant portion of the population will never embrace this strategy, no matter how much it is supported by logic and history.